Why are animals strong without working out? Why are animals like gorillas, monkeys, rhinos, and elephants so naturally strong, even though they don't go to the gym or intentionally work out? This is because of myostatins. We have proteins our bodies produce to limit muscle growth. Muscles are expensive calorie-wise, so limiting their growth makes us more energy efficient. If humans were a vehicle, we would be absolute gas guzzlers. Our brain uses up so much energy that we've developed a number of ways to make ourselves more energy efficient. One of those ways is if we don't use it, we quickly lose it in regards to sheer strength, though we can also gain strength back extremely fast as well. Our modern inactive lifestyles don't help this at all either. That being said, where we lack in sheer strength, we make up for in endurance. Even when out of shape, it's actually quite impressive compared to many animals that can only really show off their physical abilities in short bursts. How does mold work? Is something guaranteed to get moldy if the right conditions are met, or is it always just a chance? Mold is a fungus, a kind of life form that's different than animals, plants, or bacteria. Mushrooms are also fungi that reproduces via tiny little particles called spores that are really light and carry on the wind. There are spores everywhere on Earth at all times. You're sharing your room with millions or billions of them right now. You breathe them, and they cover every surface you've ever touched. The spores, if they land somewhere hospitable, will start to grow. Hospitable means some combination of moisture, nutrients, and temperature. It'll vary by species, and there are millions of them. But if you have those three things in the right configuration, mold will grow eventually. Is it true that the way burned fat actually leaves your body is when you exhale CO2? Someone told me that this is true, but I find it hard to believe this would be the only mechanism by which excess energy leaves the body. Can someone help me understand, if this is true, what it means? You breathe in oxygen, which is CO2. You breathe out carbon dioxide, which is CO2. Where do you think the carbon comes from? Carbon-containing molecules in your body, such as sugar and fat. When you burn carbon-containing compounds for energy, the actual chemistry is more complicated than simply heat plus fuel plus O2 equals sign CO2 plus energy like an ordinary fire. But in a very literal sense, carbon from these molecules is being combined with O2 from the air in order to release energy in a controlled and useful way. CO2 is not excess energy leaving the body, it is the smoke of burnt fuel leaving the body. Waste energy is produced in the form of heat, which gets radiated into the air around you. Stop being constantly 10 minutes late. Avoid the zero-time activity misconception. Some people's brains tell them that certain activities don't take any time to complete. The zero-time activity misconception. For example, we need to leave the house at 9:30 to arrive at our appointment for 10 o'clock. Good. It takes 30 minutes to get there. Good. It is now 9:30. Let's leave the house. All we need to do now is nip to the toilet, find my coat, find my shoes and put them on, find my wallet bag and check I've got what I need, get the kids in their coats and shoes, get in the car, strap the kids in, find the address of our destination, program the sat-nav, drive to the destination. Quickly stop for fuel, find somewhere to park, walk to the destination from the place parked. It goes without saying, but every single activity above does actually take a small amount of time, which all adds up. Once you internalize the idea that there isn't such a thing as zero-time activities, you'll notice that you start arriving on time. Leaving early also makes the drive significantly less stressful. Driving becomes really enjoyable when every red light, slow driver in front, or diversion doesn't matter because you're ahead of time. And if you get there without any delays, the extra 15 minutes will fly by and you're not stressing about being late. Why are there so many different types of vitamin B, but not for other letters? Vitamins are biological molecules that are not able to be created by the human body and which you need in small quantities for proper health. Inorganic compounds like iron, calcium, etc., as well as macronutrients, proteins, carbs, fats, etc., are excluded. The vitamins were classified by letter during the early 1900s, before we knew what the chemicals physically looked like. At first, we mainly figured them out by looking at the different diseases caused by deficiency. For example, scurvy is caused by lack of vitamin C. Over time, we discovered that some vitamins were actually multiple very different compounds, so we started creating sub-assignments under the letter. That's how we got some of the Bs. There were also some vitamins that we later discovered weren't actual vitamins, or were so similar to other vitamins that they didn't really deserve their own letter. Vitamin H was renamed to B7. Vitamin F ended up being a type of fat. That's why there are so many weird holes in the vitamin naming system nowadays. Why can't we get a yearly full-body MRI to scan for cancers? I've seen so many horror stories where someone gets sick or is in pain, thinking they know what's causing it, only to find out they have late-stage cancer. I don't understand. Wouldn't insurance companies want to offer this like they would a free yearly physical, as it would be cheaper for them than paying out cancer treatments? Wouldn't doctors want to push their patients to have this service done? Is even just a single MRI per person per year feasible? Google says that the US has about 1 MRI machine per 350,000 people. 350,000 people getting an MRI once per year is about 100 per day. Working 24/7 would be 1 every 15 minutes. MRIs are highly specialized exams with different scanning protocol for each body part. For example, even an MRI cervical spine, the bones in your neck, is different than an MRI soft tissue neck. MRI liver is different than MRI kidney. You could attempt to do a broad, catch-all study that tries to include the most useful parameters, but then you run into resolution and field of view issues, making it a poorer quality study. Full-body MRI is actually offered as a boutique pay-out-of-pocket service in certain countries, but it often creates more questions than it answers, and the patient likely would have to go back to re-image the body part in question just to get the right sequences and evaluate it properly, all of which may end up in it being something totally medically irrelevant or incidental. All in all, on top of a lot of things already mentioned by other commenters, the cost to the system is not worth it. How do singers in black metal bands like Deaf Heaven make it through a whole concert without destroying their vocal cords, much less a whole tour? There's a complicated technique to it, which involves using your vocal fry. It's sort of like how Marge Simpson's voice sounds. You can talk normally and push your vocals into this area, and it sounds grainy and gritty, but isn't necessarily painful. Combine that with a lot of practice, muscle development and technique, and you can make it very loud. Sometimes with a bit of saliva for good measure, extra gurgliness. There are some vocalists that do it the wrong way and just scream through the pain, but they can never sustain this for long and either have to take a break, stop entirely, or lose their voices. If you listen to something like Periphery, you'll hear how easily the vocalist can transition from very strong, high, clean notes to very guttural death metal sounds. It's a very high level of vocal technique perfection. There are also voice actors who perfect this kind of technique in a different way, such as David Hayter, who voices Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid. Also worth pointing out that there are very rare cases of vocalists doing it wrong for decades without losing their voice because of freak genetics. Devin Townsend is an example. How do the laws of physics prevent anything from traveling faster than the speed of light? I heard in a YouTube short that the laws of physics limit how fast anything can move in our universe to the speed of light. Which laws are we talking about exactly, and how? If you want to push a boulder across a field, you need to apply a amount of force to it. If you want it to go faster, then you need to apply more force. And to go faster than that, you need to apply more force, yeah? And the more massive the boulder is, the more the force requirements go up and up. All obvious, right? Light has no mass. The speed it moves at is the speed that anything with no mass moves at. Anything that has any amount of mass at all is like the boulder. Making it go faster requires more and more energy. And for anything with any amount of mass, the energy required eventually becomes impossible. Nothing with any mass can move as fast as something with no mass. Why don't hurricanes cross the equator? Think of throwing a ball from the equator to the North Pole with a superhuman throw. The Earth spins to the east, so the ball will seem like it's traveling west as the Earth rotates beneath it. If that was to keep turning, it would be a counterclockwise rotation. If you threw the ball to the South Pole, then you get a clockwise rotation. That's the Coriolis force effect. For a hurricane, it would have to start rotating the opposite way it started to be able to cross the equator. But that would violate conservation of angular momentum. Things that spin one way stay spinning that way. For the hurricane, that would mean all the energy that is going into making it a hurricane would be needed to first stop it and then start it rotating the other way. But if all the energy goes into turning it around, there's none left to keep it being a storm. If you rent a tool from Home Depot and you're not sure if 4 hours is enough, rent it shortly after 4 p.m. The tool rental part of the store closes at 8 p.m., so they allow you to bring it back by 9 a.m. next day, essentially not counting time when the store is closed. You can take it one step further. If you rent the day before a holiday before a store closes, generally only Thanksgiving and Christmas, you can rent the tool less than 4 hours before close the day prior and not return it until 9 a.m. the day after the holiday for the 4-hour rate. Christmas Eve, most stores close at 6 p.m., so you could rent it at 2:01 p.m. and keep it all the way to the day after Christmas for just the 4-hour rate. Also, this is different store to store. It typically has to be less than 4 hours before the store closes, not necessarily before rental closes. Again, this is store dependent. Did you know that Frederick Bauer, the inventor of the Pringles can, is buried in one? Frederick Bauer invented the Pringles can. When he passed away in 2008, his ashes were buried in one. Frederick John Bauer may not be a household name, but he did invent something almost universally recognizable, the Pringles can. Having secured the patent for the famous tubular container for the distinctively stacked potato chips, Bauer left a rather unusual request in his will. He asked that his ashes be buried in a Pringles can. Bauer was a chemist who specialized in food storage research and development for Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. In 1966, when almost every other potato chip came in bags, Bauer developed the iconic tube, stating that the Pringles can was a revolution within the realm of snack food. He stipulated that upon his death, a portion of his cremated ashes would be sealed up in a Pringles tube. Passing away at the age of 89, it was left to his children to act out his peculiar final wish. In a 2008 interview with Time, eldest son Larry described how they stopped at a Walgreens on their way to the funeral home to buy a can of Pringles. They decided on the classic original flavor to send their father off in style. Today, in a peaceful cemetery in the Cincinnati Springfield Township, surrounded by much fancier coffins and graves, is the final resting place of Frederick Bauer in his famous invention. How does deleting things off a device work? When I delete a photo or document off my phone computer, what is the process that is occurring? If I'm thinking of the computer like a brain, how can I just tell it to forget something? Don't think about computer storage like a brain. Think of it like a bookcase. If you delete stuff, you just take it off the bookcase. If you want to get more technical, it's actually a bit more complicated than that, and there are variations depending the kind of storage we're discussing. But broadly speaking, you'd better think as your computer phone storage like a library, where all books and their location are listed in a huge index. And what you're doing by deleting a file is just removing its reference in the inventory index. So the book will still be there for a while until new books push it off the shelf. But you won't be able to access it because it won't be listed anywhere anymore. All computer storage devices have to have a table showing where things are at. Think of the Dewey Decimal Card system in the library or a phone book. This listing on the, say, hard disk contains the name and starting location of the file you're looking for. From there, it's a daisy chain of all the links that contains the information in the file. From the computer's point of view, if it has a starting point in that directory entry, it can find the rest of the file. Deleting the file consists of erasing that starting point. The rest of it becomes invisible. and the computer treats all the rest of the file pieces as open space to be used by another file. That's how deleted files get overwritten. If you change nothing after the delete, you can recover the file, usually, by restoring that erased starting point. To truly delete a file, you have to erase all the pieces of the file, not just the starting point. Did Cory Booker literally speak for 24 hours straight? I keep hearing that Cory Booker gave a 24-hour speech at the Senate. Does this literally mean he spoke for 24 hours straight, without pause? Or does his speech mean something different in this context? I'm confused. He spoke for about 25 hours straight, minus a bit of time that his colleagues used to ask him questions to give him a bit of a rest. But yes, he basically spoke for a full calendar day non-stop, and without just resorting to reading from the phone book or whatever, and did not take any bathroom breaks or eat food, and only had access to 2 glasses of water. He did not leave that spot for the entirety of his speech. He didn't eat anything since Friday, and didn't drink water since Sunday to dehydrate himself, to reduce his urinary output, so he could hold out as long as possible. Senate rules state that to hold the floor, the person speaking must remain standing, cannot leave their position, and must speak more or less continuously, with one exception which I talk about below. If they sit down, leave the podium, or fall silent for more than a brief pause, they are considered to have yielded the floor. However, a senator may yield for a question asterisk without asterisk yielding the floor. That's why other senators continually asked if Booker would yield for a question. It gives the speaking senator an excuse to stop speaking, drink, rest their voice, think of more things to say, while still following the rules of the Senate. So this is all to say that Senator Booker did not literally speak non-stop for 24 hours, nor did Strom Thurmond, who held the previous record of 24 hours, 18 minutes. They both spoke for as long as they could without yielding the floor. Technically, you are allowed to step away from the lectern, but you are not allowed to leave the Senate floor. When Strom Thurmond performed his filibuster, his aides actually set up a makeshift curtained porta-potty immediately adjacent to one of the exits near the lectern so that he could lean out around the corner to use the toilet, but keep one foot in the Senate chambers and technically not leave the floor. Why do I sometimes look at a word and it looks weird to me? Even though it's a very common word, this is called semantic satiation. Basically, your brain is getting tired of the word and starts to ignore it. It's kinda like how you tune out repetitive noises, boring stuff after a while. Semantic satiation is a psychological phenomenon in which repetition causes a word or phrase to temporarily lose meaning for the listener, who then perceives the speech as repeated, meaningless sounds. Extended inspection or analysis, staring at the word or phrase for a long time, in place of repetition, also produces the same effect. To add on to semantic satiation, the main reason why is because of how it actually sounds. When you say the word, given the word join as an example, join, you hear it as join. When you say it 10 times in a row, instead of join, your brain hears injo. What are chiropractors doing when cracking your body? How did it crack so loud? Why they feel better? What does it do to your body? How did it help? People often say it's dangerous and a fraud, so why they don't get banned? When you crack your bones, you release gas bubbles within your joints. It's largely harmless, but equally largely don't do much. How does this fit in with chiropractic? For the most part, it helps sell the idea that they are actually doing something. Chiropractic is a pseudoscience that generally has no measurable effect, but your back or neck going crack makes it feel like something should have happened. There are some very specific conditions that can be helped by chiropractic care, not because of the reasons a chiropractor claims. There is some evidence that it can be useful against some forms of back pain, simply because chiropractic care happens to involve stretching and a form of massage. The flip side is that there is also evidence that it can make other types of back pain worse. The conclusion is that if you suffer from back pain, go to a doctor and they can assign you to physical therapy that is actually targeted towards whatever ails you, rather than going to a chiropractor who might help you by accident, but also may be making your injury worse. I would like to add, because everyone expects physical therapy to act like a pain drug. If you get physical therapy and they show you what exercises may help with your ailment, you actually have to do them regularly at home too. Years of insufficient exercise and bad posture won't be fixed in like 6x30 minds of physical therapy or something like that. How do rice cookers know how long to cook the rice for no matter the different quantities? The amount of time a rice cooker operates is often based on the amount of water which is added. Rice cookers are extremely simple. They contain a piece of metal which is magnetic, but will become non-magnetic when heated above the boiling temperature of water. That metal is used to complete an electric circuit that powers the heating element and is exposed to the water within the rice cooker. The cooker will heat the water, which will never exceed the boiling point while there is water left. And when the water runs out, the temperature inside will begin to rise. That causes the metal to stop being magnetic, which releases the electrical circuit which powers the heating element, completing the cooking of the rice without it being too wet and before it starts to burn. If three-legged chairs, tables are automatically stable and don't wobble, why is four legs the default? Because a three-legged chair is only stable until it gets bumped. A four-legged chair can be bumped a lot harder until it falls over. While three-legged chairs don't wobble, they do tip over easier if you lean in them. This can be fixed by making the leg span really wide, but that makes them kind of inconvenient. On the other hand, four legs might wobble, but they don't tip as easy, allowing them to be slimmer and fit better at the dinner table and such. Why is Death Valley one of the hottest places on Earth, despite being far from the equator? Actually, the same can be said for places like Australia. You would think places in the equator are hotter because they receive more heat due to the sunlight being concentrated on a smaller area, and places away are colder because heat has to be concentrated over a larger area. But that observation appears to be flawed. Why? You are only looking at half the equation. Places are hot because they get more heat than they lose. Places are cold because they lose more heat than they get. Death Valley is hotter than many equatorial locales because the geography nearby doesn't allow the heat to escape easily. The middle part of Australia is hot because God has abandoned it. The local meteorological conditions trap hot air similarly to how Death Valley's mountains trap heat. How is it possible to dig tunnels under major waterways without being crushed and/or flooded? How does water not eventually permeate down there? There's various methods, and it's all dependent on the makeup of the soils between the waterway bottom and the tunnel, as well as the natural groundwater table in the area, whether it is below the tunnel being drilled or not. Essentially, yes, the water from the waterway permeates down through the soils into the tunnel. The question is, at what rate does the water perk down through the soils? If it's too fast, it will have to be handled in some way, like pumps to evacuate the water. In the event the soils are a stiffer clay, the hole likely holds itself open and lets very little water through. If it's loose and sandy or rocky, it'll be unstable and want to collapse as soon as the drill is moved. If the hole is unstable such that it may collapse and a really large diameter, a giant boring machine, TBM tunnel boring machine, grinds through, creating the cavern, but at the same time, it cases the hole with slabs of concrete piece by piece as it inches forward very slowly. The concrete slabs get concreted together into a structure. It's less of a drill bit and more of an enormous machine, like a train with many functions. Maybe it is a fully submerged wet hole. Use a slurry of bentonite to fill the hole while a drill pushes forward. The slurry is stout enough to hold the hole open, and then a pipe is pulled through. Smaller type holes for things like pipes, not a roadway tunnel. Lots of crazy ways it gets done. There was one where the soils were going to get too unstable as the TBM advanced along because there wasn't much soil between the tunnel and the buildings and river, etc. above. Some genius figured out frozen soils are often hard as solid rock, so he figured out how to use the top of the machine to freeze the soils above the tunnel. If fruit is sweet, to encourage animals to eat it and carry the seeds away from the parent tree, how do lemons and limes fit into this mix? Because lemons and limes are crossbreeds that weren't actually a wild plant. And even if they weren't sweet, their ancestors still had sugars, and that made them appealing for creatures to eat. Most of the types of citrus plant that we grow and sell in produce sections now were crossbred from a mix of only a few original plants. Lemons come from citron, a really thick-rinded fruit with a small but sweet pulpy core, and bitter orange, which is what it sounds like. Limes comes from a citrus-type tree called micrantha, but even so, just because they taste sour doesn't mean that animals won't eat and spread them. A lemon does have sugars, and in the same way we humans like a little bitterness, animals may appreciate it too. Food doesn't have to taste sweet to be extremely healthy and an easy source of calories. Why can't two or more speakers connect to one audio device via Bluetooth? The standard Bluetooth profile, the instructions for how the Bluetooth connection is used basically, for music called A2DP, is designed for a one-to-one connection. That is a phone and a speaker. There's ways to get around this. Samsung Dual Audio and Apple Audio Sharing will send the signal over two separate A2DP connections from the device, but this is a feature designed by these companies for their devices and only works on BT5+. There's also a relay method where if you have a number of compatible speakers, each one could both receive and rebroadcast the Bluetooth signal to the next speaker. Bose and Sony do this. As you can imagine, there's a certain point where a speaker down the line, and any after it, will be noticeably out of sync with the first speakers due to BT latency. Each device that broadcasts the BT signal needs bandwidth, a radio, and some CPU time to run the whole thing. If you try to stuff multiple BT connections onto a single radio or CPU, one of them is going to hit a bottleneck at a certain point. Theoretically, you could create a product with several radios and enough processing power to run them all, but you'd also need a way to ensure they're all timed correctly with each other too, which is probably the harder part. And even then, you're still going up against congestion of the 2.4 GHz spectrum, especially with everything coming out of one localized source, even if it has multiple radios. Why does salt bring out flavor in everything? Salt enhances flavor by acting on both our senses and the food itself. On the tongue, sodium ions activate specific channels that not only create a salty taste, but also suppress bitterness and boost sweetness, making foods taste more balanced. In food, salt changes protein structures and draws out water through osmosis, releasing aroma compounds that strengthen flavor perception since much of flavor comes from smell. It also helps meat retain moisture and improves texture. And because sodium is essential for nerve and muscle function, our brains are hardwired to find it rewarding, which makes foods with salt seem more flavorful. Why does a hangover sometimes make you feel ravenously hungry, even when you're also nauseous? Your body needs water and nutrients to get rid of the poison you drank yesterday. It's working overtime and needs fuel, but your brain is also telling you that something you've been drinking recently is poisonous and you should stop. Also, a lot of times when you're feeling hungry, you're actually thirsty and your body is doing everything it can to get you to do something about it before dehydration starts or gets worse. Why can't we use desert sand for construction? Most of the sand uses in construction is probably for concrete. For every aspect of construction that uses sand, you need specific types of sand. One of the most important things is the grading of the aggregates. That is the range of particle sizes. Historically, we've used river sand in concrete that usually has quite a good grading of particle sizes that makes it ideal for concrete. But that's running out because we make a lot of concrete. A lot of quarries now manufacture sand by crushing rocks. You can control the particle size doing that, but because it's crushed, it is more angular and has a higher surface area. That affects the way it interacts with water and how easily you work and place the concrete. It's not usually as good as river sand, which is a bit more rounded. Desert sand will vary by area, but a lot of deserts have very, very fine sand. That means it won't have the right distribution of particle sizes for it to be useful in concrete. For concrete, you want sand that has a specific grading, with particles ranging from about 5 mm to 63 micrometers. You don't want a lot of very fine material because the finer particles are, the higher overall surface area you have for a given mass. Again, this affects how it interacts with water. You wouldn't typically use sand from beaches or anywhere with salt, including deserts with salt flats. Salt is bad in concrete. It can cause adverse chemical reactions and also leads to steel corrosion in reinforced concrete. Now, why doesn't crystallized sugar spoil? Microbes certainly would want to eat sugar. However, sugar is hygroscopic. Water gets sucked up by sugar almost instantly. It sucks it all up so the bacteria can't live. That's why it's an excellent preservative. Water activity is low. If a microorganism tried to eat the sugar, it would be in an environment with nearly no ambient water. Plus, the water inside itself would very much like to be absorbed into the dry sugar all around. Very quickly, the microbe would dry out and die. What is the difference between 5-star hotels? 1-star hotel, just the basics. Think a clean bed and a roof, nothing fancy. 2-star hotel, still simple but with a few extras like a TV or front desk service. 3-star hotel, comfortable and reliable, with things like a restaurant, gym, pool or decent lobby. 4-star hotel, stylish and higher end, offering more services like room service or concierge help. 5-star hotel, luxury all the way with top-notch comfort, personalized service, and every amenity you could imagine. There might be some overlap in amenities between stars, but that's the gist of it. Lots of hotels of all levels have pools. When a baby is born, how are their lungs instantly able to breathe air if they haven't been breathing air for 9 months? The placenta is what brings oxygen from mum to baby through baby's umbilical cord. That's where their belly button is, instead of through the lungs. When baby is inside mum, blood that has oxygen in it goes to the heart where it gets pumped out to the rest of the body. In you and me, there's a little door that has a tunnel between the right side of the heart and the lungs. Our blood that needs oxygen goes through that tunnel to the lungs and then comes back through another tunnel to the left side of the heart where it gets pumped out to the rest of the body. In an unborn baby, the little door between the right side of the heart and lungs is closed, and the pressure behind the door is very high. It's too hard for blood to get through it, so it goes around through another secret little door to the left side of the heart. When a baby is born, there is a big shift in pressure behind that little door. When a baby takes its first breath, the secret little door slams shut. It's kind of like when a door slams shut because of wind. When that secret little door slams shut, the pressure behind the door to the lungs gets lower, and that door gets unlocked. Now the blood in the right side of the heart can go through that little door to the lungs where it picks up oxygen, goes to the left side of the heart, and then gets pumped through the rest of the body. When baby is inside mum, the lungs still get a little bit of blood to them, but they aren't the primary place where gas exchange takes place, where oxygen and carbon dioxide move in and out. They're working on growing and producing a slippery soap-like substance called surfactant. The surfactant helps keep tiny air sacs called alveoli open and from sticking shut. The alveoli are where gas exchange takes place, otherwise known as how oxygen and carbon dioxide move in and out of your body. When the baby is born, that pressure change and sudden blood volume to the lungs and alveoli causes gas exchange to happen, and that's how baby now breathes and gets its oxygen. Why do ships have circular windows instead of square ones? For the same reason that airplanes have roundish windows. The structure of a ship is put through a lot of changing stresses, both in the sense of the ship being heaved and twisted by waves, and in some cases, having actual water pressing against the portholes. The corners or square windows are a point where stresses can build up. It's a weak point. Circles or circular shapes are better at distributing forces equally. The same is true in airplanes, though there the pressure is from the inside as the outside pressure drops. Early jets had square windows, and it caused several accidents as the uneven stresses over many flights led to metal fatigue and finally failure. What is the engineering and design behind M chips that gives it better performance than Intel chips? Imagine that whatever processor is a house, Intel has had this house for 30+ years and has had lots of different families living in it. They also don't know exactly who is going to live there next. Because of this, the bathroom has 2 sinks, a shower, a bathtub, a toilet, an Asian-style toilet, a sauna and a steam room. The garage has space for 2 cars, a boat, an RV and 5 motorcycles. It has a huge water line, solar, and a backup generator just in case. There is a nursery in case of baby, 3 bedrooms and 2 offices. This all takes up a bunch of room, and some of the fixtures aren't all that new. But until they know who is going to live there next, they don't know if it's worth upgrading them, if they aren't going to get used, and they can't remove anything in case one of the old families comes back to visit. Apple gets to build a new house and pick exactly who is going to live there. They know it's going to be 2 people who never use the sink at the same time. They like Western-style toilets, never take showers, and are fine with just solar. They own 2 cars and a motorcycle, and they are both afraid of boats. Only one of these people works at home, so 1 office, and they always get takeout, so they don't even need a kitchen. Apple's house is smaller, easier to cool in the summer, needs a smaller water main, and all the fixtures are new. It's perfect for this one family they picked, and really not what anyone else is looking for. Why is it so hard to sleep when you haven't done anything all day, even if you were resting because you're tired? It is because you're not tired, you are just psychologically conditioned to believe it's time to sleep. Michael Sifry experimented on himself by spending extended periods of time in caves and discovered that without any reference for time, that his sleep schedule varied wildly with him, sometimes perceiving a day as much as 50 hours. Why do many pop songs have so many different songwriters listed? Studios that produce pop music typically have in-house songwriters. They might work collaboratively, they might reuse ideas from each other's work, they might even dig up unused lyrics written by someone else and add their own elements. Some people say that pop music is produced in an assembly line. How is peach flavoring so easily captured in gummies, water, etc., when so many other flavors taste obviously fake? Peaches have less chemical complexity than something like a watermelon, for instance. With a peach, scientists have discovered the right set of flavor molecules, sometimes referred to as esters, that create the proper taste of a peach. I also believe the main molecular component that gives a peach its taste can be used as a food additive, like the molecule found in apples. In contrast, the flavor molecule that makes up the most common watermelon taste, red innards, green rind, is referred to as an aldehyde and isn't as simple. This molecule is too unstable to be made into a food additive. To top it off, watermelons, like bananas, have an incredibly rich and complex flavor profile in terms of chemical makeup. You also have far more varieties of a watermelon, also like bananas, than you do a peach, making it ever the more complicated. Unless somebody finds something that mimics the watermelon aldehyde properly, or can create a stable compound using it, you're stuck with not really watermelon-flavored watermelon candy and/or treats. If cockroaches we see living in our kitchens, bathrooms, and the sewers are such hardy creatures, why don't we see large populations of them in gardens and woods where there's plenty of moisture and food? Cockroaches are hardy, fast animals that can move fast and get in the nooks and crannies of our houses. Plenty of refuge, food, easy access, and very importantly, stable temperatures and weather. In nature, they're fast-moving meals, and house cockroaches can get big and therefore big targets. Birds, reptiles, and stuff that see them will be thankful for the meal. Why aren't viruses considered alive? One of the key traits of life is the ability of an organism to respond to its environment, i.e., take actions, or change its behavior in some way based on what might help it survive. It's sometimes called sensitivity to stimuli. It's easy to see how animals do this. Even bacteria move around under a microscope, and plants will even grow and shift toward light sources. But viruses are purely passive. They're just strange, complex lumps of DNA that float around and reproduce purely by stumbling across cells to hijack. No matter how you change the environment of a bacteria or virus, or how you might try to stimulate it, it just sits there, doing nothing. until the right chemical molecule happens to bump up against it, and then its reproductive action goes. What would happen if a comet didn't actually hit the Earth, but got close enough that the tail passed through the Earth's atmosphere? It would cause a meteor shower. Many meteor showers are just the Earth passing through the remnants of a comet's tail. For example, the Orionid meteor shower that is coming up next month was caused by Halley's Comet. Why is bread harder after heating it up and cooling it down than after doing nothing? The heat drives the moisture out of the bread. This makes it feel softer while it's warm, but once it cools back down to room temperature, it's now back where it started, but with even less moisture. A large part of what makes bread hard is starch. As the bread dehydrates, that starch gets stiff and hardens. When you heat up the bread, some of the moisture from inside the bread rehydrates the starch on the outside of the bread, making it soft again for a little bit. How do giraffes not pass out every time they bend down to drink water? They have a sort of meshwork of small veins and arteries, the rete mirabile, which acts a bit like a sponge that slows down the blood flow. Giraffes have one-way valves in their neck vasculature, similar to the ones found in human legs. This prevents drastic blood pressure changes. How do scientists know what the inside of planets like Earth or Jupiter is made of if we can't drill that deep? We can measure how large other planets are, and by tracking their orbit, we can use physics to calculate how much total mass it has. With size and mass, we can then calculate the average density of the planet. That already says a lot about its composition. For Jupiter, the average density is 1,300 kilograms per cubic meter, so only a bit denser than water. This would not be possible if Jupiter was a rocky planet like ours, so we deduce that it is mostly gas, also called a gas giant. By looking at the light coming from a planet, we can also get some insights into what its most common elements are. Kinda like how if you see something blue in the distance, you know it's water, but then way more advanced, and also looking at light from outside the visible spectrum. This way we know that Jupiter is mostly hydrogen and helium. Then there are some more things that can be investigated, either from Earth or by sending probes. We managed to measure that Jupiter has a very strong magnetic field, so that means that there has to be something conductive in the core. Combining with the other observations, we predict that it is likely metallic hydrogen. What is cloudflare and why does it affect the internet so much when it goes down? All right, imagine the internet is like a giant city and websites are like stores in that city. Now, to keep those stores safe from robbers, traffic jams, and power outages, many of them hire the same security guard company. That company is called Cloudflare. Cloudflare's job is to protect stores from bad guys, like hackers or spam, help cars like your game data get to the store faster, keep things running even if the store's front door breaks. Because they're really good at this, a ton of stores, websites, game servers, apps rely on them. But here's the problem. If Cloudflare trips over a power cord, goes down, all the stores that hired them suddenly can't open their doors or serve customers. That's why when Cloudflare has issues, it looks like half the internet broke, because a lot of it depends on that one company. So, in kid terms, Cloudflare is the superhero guard dog keeping a huge part of the internet safe and speedy. But if that dog takes a nap, everything it was guarding gets a little messy. Why are the screens in even luxury cars often so laggy? What prevents them from just investing a couple $100 more to install a faster chip? Components in cars have to deal with a much wider range of temperatures and operating conditions than, say, your tablet or phone. In some places, like here in Canada, winters can mean that my car's screen sees 35°C in the dead of winter and plus 35°C in the heat of summer. They're expected to last at *least* until the car's 3 to 5 years warranty is up, and the same for the little computers that drive the screens. Add to that the fact that the computers are buried in the dash with no active cooling, that they have to run on the car's 12-volt system without putting too much strain on it, and that they are designed and ordered years before the car hits showroom floors. You've got to have components that can be procured by the hundreds of thousands, that are already mature enough to have known reliability, and to work within the constraints of a car environment. Things are improving, but the tech in car infotainment systems will always be 5+ YRs behind the curve because they're simply dealing with a different set of requirements than the other equipment you use. Why does it take forever for hot water to reach the shower? The water in the hot water heater is hot. The water in the pipes in between the hot water heater and your shower has cooled down since the last time you used it. It takes time for the hot water to push all that cold water out. Most people also don't turn the valve to full hot, which means that water is moving relatively slowly. The way to get hot water to the shower fast is to turn the valve to all the way hot, wait for it to warm up, and then turn it to your preferred setting. Plus, the pipe itself has to get up to the temperature of the hot water before you get the full temp to the shower, and the shower is often one of the furthest things from the water heater. Water heater in basement and shower on the second floor near bedrooms. Why do athletes from different track and field events all run in a specific way, unique to their discipline? It's performance related. Every jumping discipline requires your body to be in a particular position when you make the leap. So you run with the twin goals of 1, being at the right speed at the right time, and 2, having your body be in the right position at the right time. For example, for a long jump, you basically want to be going as fast as possible, except that you have to be able to leap slightly upward. A sprinter can lean forward toward the end and thus go slightly faster, but as the jumper, you have to get your center of gravity a little more under you. Thus you run differently so you don't lean too far and are unable to get the elevation that allows you to translate speed into distance. For high jumps, you aren't directly translating speed into height, so you run to get the right level of momentum while maintaining your body lean, such that you can maximize your vertical power and jump as high as possible. If you ran too fast, you'd end up out of position and be able to jump lower, but probably farther. What does be there or be square even mean? Square means not cool, not hip. Be there or be square means you can either be there or you can be boring and uncool and not be there. Also, it rhymes, so it's catchy, so people repeat it. How do LEDs produce light and color? When you run electricity through an LED, it's like pushing electrons up a ramp and letting them fall on the other side. The way they fall is by emitting a photon. The color of the photon is relative to the height of the ramp. The higher it is, the more energy it has, the bluer it is. The only thing is that the ramp and the fall are all about electromagnetism, energy, and quantum mechanics, instead of actually falling due to gravity. Have you ever wondered why there are so many bland-colored cars, like black, white, and gray, but not as many colorful ones? It's because there are more people with negative feelings about strong colors than negative feelings about bland colors. You may not get excited about a white Ford Fiesta, but you'll most likely avoid buying the avocado green one.
If fruits are usually sweet to attract animals so they'll eat them and spread the seeds, then where do sour fruits like lemons and limes come in? Life didn't give us lemons, we gave them to ourselves. When life gives you lemons, genetically engineer them to be more sour. Citrus fruits have been heavily cultivated by humans, and along the way we dramatically exaggerated their acidity flavors because we like them that way. Lemons and limes didn't even evolve naturally at all, they're crossbreeds. What is lossless audio and how much are listeners losing by not using it? Audio files can be big. Smart people made a code that can make them small by trimming some of the fluff off the top end. It's a bit like when take a photo and change the resolution to a worse one. It's mostly all there, but if you listen really carefully, you can probably tell something isn't quite right, or the best version of it.
How did we figure out plants take in CO2 and push out oxygen? It's not like we've ever seen trees puffing air. People were working on this starting in the Renaissance. A well-known example is when, in the early 1600s, a guy named Jan Baptist van Helmont grew a willow tree in a pot with carefully weighed soil. From the fact that the tree gained a lot of mass, but the soil lost much less, he showed that most of the tree's material must not be coming from the soil. However, he leapt to an only half-right conclusion, that the plant was somehow converting the water into wood. Photosynthesis does use water, but it also uses air, as you obviously know. But it was clear as early as the mid-1600s that plants are not just eating soil the way animals eat food. Something else was going on. The bigger development was a series of experiments in the late 1700s by Joseph Priestley and Jan Ingenhousz using sealed jars. They would do things like seal a mouse in a jar with a lit candle, which let them figure out that whatever lets candles burn also lets mice be conscious. Not to be too blunt about it, when one goes out, the other does too, basically. But they also figured out that whatever is being depleted in air by fire and by respiration can be replaced by a plant in the sealed jar, at least if the plant is in sunlight. From there, it wasn't too hard to work out the basic shape of photosynthesis, although it would still be a long time before the actual mechanism was worked out, like what chlorophyll is actually doing to molecules in modern chemical terms. So starting to figure out what plants do was pretty closely entwined with starting to figure out what oxygen and CO2 are in the first place. It was all one big picture to fill in, with a lot of cross-checking.
Here's something that will blow your mind. Sloths actually have more neck bones than giraffes. Giraffes are famous for their long necks, but they only have 7 neck vertebrae, the same number humans have. Sloths, on the other hand, can have up to 10. That means their necks are more flexible, and they can rotate their heads almost 270 degrees. That's owl-level movement from a creature that spends most of its life just hanging around. So even though giraffes look like the kings of necks, sloths secretly win when it comes to neck bones and flexibility. Crazy, right? Think it's incredible that humans can conquer Everest? Think again, bees can fly even higher. Mount Everest is 29,032 feet tall, but bees have been spotted flying over 29,500 feet. That's higher than the tallest mountain on Earth. At that height, the air is thin and freezing, yet bees somehow manage to survive and keep buzzing. Imagine a tiny bee battling the cold, thin air while humans are struggling with oxygen masks. Nature's tiny superheroes in action. So, next time you see a bee, think Everest isn't high enough for them.